The rain doesn't care who you are. It falls on kings and criminals alike, soaking through $5,000 suits and silk dresses with equal indifference. It falls on graveyards at midnight when powerful men drop to their knees and stop being powerful at all. Louisa watches him from behind the iron gate, her breath fogging in the cold air, her fingers gripping the rusted metal so hard her knuckles ache. She should leave. She came here only to confirm what she already knew, that he'd moved on, that he'd forgotten, that the man who once pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "You are the only peace I have ever known," had returned to being the monster the world always said he was. She did not expect this. Baek Do-hyun, feared head of the Baek syndicate, a man whose name makes prosecutors sweat and rivals disappear, is on his knees in the mud. His shoulders shake, his hands press flat against the grave marker, fingers spreading over the engraved letters of a name that is hers. He is crying. Not the polished grief of a man performing sorrow for an audience. This is something broken open and raw, the kind of sound that lives below language, below dignity, below everything a man like him has spent a lifetime building to keep the world out. Louisa's chest cracks. She was supposed to be dead. She chose this. She had reasons, good ones, desperate ones, the kind forged in fear and betrayal, and a truth she still doesn't know how to say out loud. But standing here, watching him fall apart at a grave that holds no body, she wonders if she made the most catastrophic mistake of her life. Welcome to Afro Career Stories by I Am Besties. Please like, share and subscribe. 3 months earlier, Louisa had been exactly what she appeared to be. A forensic accountant with sharp eyes, a talent for finding numbers that didn't want to be found, and absolutely no business being in the orbit of Baek Do-hyun. She'd been hired by a third-party auditing firm, neutral, independent, above reproach. Her assignment was a shell corporation called Helix Pacific, which on paper moved shipping logistics and on paper was entirely boring. Louisa had been hired because she was good at reading paper, because she understood that numbers lie the same way people do, not by saying the wrong thing, but by saying too little. She found the discrepancy on a Tuesday afternoon, coffee going cold beside her laptop, the Seoul skyline indifferent outside her window. $47 million. Moved in fragments, small enough not to trigger automated flags, routed through 7 countries, landing in an account she couldn't open. Not because she lacked the access, but because the account didn't officially exist. She should have flagged it to her supervisor and stepped back. Instead, she pulled the thread. That was her first mistake, or her greatest act of courage, depending on how the story ends. The meeting happened on a Thursday. Her firm sent her to present preliminary findings to the client's legal team. A routine check-in, they said. Bring your notes, they said. It will be quick. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Baek Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows, and a silence so deliberate it felt manufactured. 3 lawyers sat on one side of the table. Louisa sat on the other, her folder open, her posture steady even as something in the room pressed against her chest like a hand. Then the door opened. She'd seen his photograph. Everyone who worked in Seoul's financial sector had. The face of Baek Do-hyun appeared in business magazines with the frequency of a man who understood that visibility was its own form of armor. In photographs, he looked exactly like what he was, handsome in a severe way, composed, the kind of still that suggested he'd simply decided long ago that nothing would move him. In person, he was different. Not taller than she expected, not louder, different in the way that a photograph of a fire is different from standing beside one. There was a quality to him, a density, a weight that photographs couldn't capture, and it hit Louisa somewhere below the sternum before she'd even processed his face. He looked at her the moment he entered, not past her, not through her, at her. The way people look at things they're trying to understand. "Ms. Adeyemi," one of the lawyers said, mispronouncing her name with practiced carelessness. "Adeyemi," Louisa corrected, calm. She didn't look away from Do-hyun when she said it. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest edge of a thing that wasn't quite a smile. He sat across from her. The lawyers began talking. Louisa answered their questions with precision, kept her eyes on her notes, kept her breathing measured and even, and was absolutely, completely aware of every single second that his gaze rested on her face. After 40 minutes, after the lawyers seemed satisfied and began gathering papers, he spoke for the first time. "You found something you weren't supposed to find." Not a question. His voice was low, unhurried, with the particular cadence of a man who'd learned that silence made other people fill space with truth. The lawyers went still. Louisa looked up, met his eyes directly. Dark, assessing, and now holding something she couldn't name but felt in the backs of her hands. "I found what the numbers pointed to," she said. "That's my job." "And what did the numbers point to?" "A conversation your legal team should have privately," she said, "with their client." The silence stretched. One of the lawyers exhaled. Do-hyun's gaze didn't move from her face, and Louisa held it without flinching, even as every nerve ending she possessed fired at once. "Leave us," he said finally. The lawyers hesitated. Then they left. The conference room emptied in under 30 seconds. The door clicked shut. Louisa sat with her folder open on the table and Baek Do-hyun across from her, and the Seoul skyline stretched behind him like a backdrop designed to make him look inevitable. "You're not afraid," he said. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Afraid people fidget." He looked at her hands, which were still. "You're not afraid." Louisa closed her folder. "I'm professionally composed. There's a difference." A pause. "And I have copies of everything off-site." His head tilted slightly. "Is that a threat?" "It's information. You can do with it what you'd like." Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, which she'd braced for, but something more unsettling, interest. Genuine, focused, undiluted interest, the kind she suspected he gave to very few things. "The account you found," he said. "What do you think it's for?" "I think it moves money that can't be seen moving. I think it's been doing that for at least 4 years. She held his gaze. "I think you already know everything I found, and this conversation is you deciding whether I'm a problem or an asset." Silence. Then, quietly, "Which do you want to be?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not threatening. Almost honest, like he was genuinely asking. "I want to finish my contract," Louisa said. "Submit my official report with the findings my firm authorized me to find, and go home." "And the rest?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Needs to be someone else's problem." He studied her, really studied her, the way she'd seen architects look at structural plans searching for load-bearing points. Then he nodded. Once. "All right." She hadn't expected agreement. It must have shown, because the almost smile returned. "Go home, Ms. Adeyemi," he said. "You'll hear from me." She left with her folder and her composure intact, and her heart hammering so hard she felt it in her throat the entire elevator ride down. He called 2 days later. She let it ring through twice before answering. The professional version of taking a breath. "There's a position," he said without preamble or greeting. "Internal compliance. My team needs someone who reads numbers the way you do. Someone who asks questions no one else thinks to ask. A beat. Someone not afraid to say things I don't want to hear." Louisa stood in her apartment kitchen, coffee halfway to her mouth. Outside, Seoul hummed in the early morning. "You want to hire me. I want to retain you. The distinction matters. You know my firm won't allow a direct conflict of, 'Your contract with them ends in 3 weeks. I've confirmed this." He wasn't apologetic about knowing. The offer would begin after. She should have said no. She knew the shape of his world. She'd grown up in a family that built things through patient work and honest sweat, and she understood intellectually every reason to hang up the phone and never think about Baek Do-hyun again. "What's the compensation package?" she asked instead. He named a number. She set down her coffee very carefully. "I'll think about it," she said. "You've already decided." The same unhurried voice, certain without cruelty. She hung up on him. She accepted the position 16 days later. Working in Baek Tower was like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. The pressure was constant and specific, not hostile exactly, but dense, the way deep water is dense. Everyone moved with precision. No one wasted words. The culture of the place was shaped entirely around the man at the top, and even before she understood his world clearly, Louisa understood that Baek Do-hyun ran it the way he occupied a room. Absolutely, without effort, as though any other arrangement would be physically impossible. She kept to her lane. She was good at her job. She delivered her reports on time, her recommendations thorough, her language precise. She spent the first 3 weeks barely seeing him. A glimpse across the lobby, a voice through an office wall. She told herself this was fine, preferable even. Then he started showing up, not in obvious ways. A question about a report she'd submitted. Could she walk through her reasoning? A meeting that ran long and somehow ended with just the two of them at a conference table. Her explaining supply chain irregularities in the Singapore contracts while he listened with the focused attention he gave everything, that dark gaze steady on her face until she forgot what she was saying and had to look at her notes. He never touched her. Not once in those early weeks. But there was a quality to his proximity, the way he angled toward her without moving, the way his attention felt like a physical thing with weight, that made touch feel almost beside the point. Louisa started going home and standing in the shower longer than necessary, trying to think clearly. She started making lists of reasons this was professionally and personally inadvisable. The lists were thorough. They helped approximately nothing. The 4th week he asked her to dinner. Not a business dinner, no framing, no pretense, no lawyers or colleagues attached. Just, "Have dinner with me, tonight, I'll send a car." They were walking through the parking structure, her car in the adjacent row. She stopped walking. "That's not a work thing," she said. "No," he agreed. "We have a professional—" "Yes." She looked at him. He was already watching her, hands in his pockets, absolutely unhurried, as though he had already accounted for every possible response she might give and had decided in advance to wait her out. "You're very direct," she said. "I've found it saves time." A beat. The parking structure was quiet except for the hum of ventilation. Something in Louisa's chest pulled toward him like a tide toward shore, warm, specific, and completely inconvenient. "Where?" she asked. The restaurant was small and discreet, tucked into a side street in Jongno, the kind of place where the lighting was low and the staff moved like they understood that sometimes people needed to not be seen. Do Hyun arrived before her. He stood when she walked in, a small gesture, automatic, and somehow the most disarming thing he'd done yet. She wore a deep burgundy dress, fitted through the waist and hips, her natural hair pinned up with a few curls escaping around her face. She'd spent 20 minutes telling herself it didn't matter what she wore and then changed twice. She noticed as she crossed the room toward him that his gaze moved over her exactly once, quick, thorough, controlled, and then settled back on her face, where it stayed. "You look—" He stopped. "I look what?" she asked, sliding into her seat. "Difficult," he said, "to stop looking at." Louisa unfolded her napkin with great concentration. "That's not a normal thing to say." "I don't often say things to be normal." Wine arrived. They ordered. And then, in the space between bread and the first course, something shifted. The professional scaffolding fell away, and for the first time she saw him without it. He asked about her family. Real questions, not social ones. What her mother was like, what she'd wanted to be as a child before she knew accounting was a thing. She told him about growing up in Lagos. The way numbers had always seemed to her like a secret language the world hadn't told her she was allowed to speak. How the first time she balanced a spreadsheet, she felt something click in her chest, like a lock turning. He listened the way he did everything, completely. "You," she said eventually, because fairness demanded it, "grew up in this world. I was born into it." The distinction in his voice was careful. "There's a difference. Do you wish there wasn't?" A pause. Long enough that she thought he might deflect. "When I was 17, he said, I thought I would leave. Study mathematics. I was good at it." He looked down at his glass. "Then my father died, and leaving stopped being a thing that existed." She felt the weight of it. Not pity, which she suspected he'd reject, but recognition. The way some lives arrive already shaped, and the person inside them has to decide whether to inhabit the shape or break it. "Are you trying to break it?" she asked quietly. His eyes came back to hers. "I'm trying to build something inside it that isn't only damage. A beat. Some days, that's harder than others." They stayed 3 hours. Walking out, the night cool and quiet around them, his hand brushed the small of her back to guide her around a broken section of sidewalk. She felt it through the fabric of her dress like a brand. 3 seconds of contact, featherlight, and then his hand was gone, but the warmth of it stayed all the way home. She should have kept distance after that. She knew the architecture of this, the gravity of it, the way it had already started pulling her in a direction she hadn't chosen. She didn't keep distance. Within 6 weeks, dinner became a frequency. Not every night. He respected the rhythm of her work, her need for space, and she recognized that the restraint cost him something. She'd catch him watching her across the office floor sometimes, and look away before he could see that she'd noticed. Which he always did anyway, which made her feel seen in a way that was terrifying and completely addictive. The first time he almost kissed her, they were in his office at 11 at night, the city sparkling below them. A difference of opinion about a report becoming a conversation that kept not being over. He'd moved to stand beside her at the window to look at the document in her hand, and the proximity, his shoulder near hers, his voice low in the quiet, stretched the moment out until neither of them was talking about the report anymore. "Louisa," he said. Just that. She turned toward him. They were close, closer than colleagues, already past the geography of professional. His gaze dropped to her mouth for half a breath. Her phone rang. She answered it without looking away from him, which was a mistake, because his expression in that instant, the almost surrender of it, the restraint snapping back into place, was something she replayed for days afterward. His world had edges, she felt before she saw them. A meeting cancelled with no explanation. A name mentioned in a report that made the room go quiet. The particular way his head of security, Park Jun, watched doors when Do Hyun was in a room. Louisa was not naive. She understood she had walked into something with deep roots and dark water. But knowing the shape of a thing and standing inside it are different experiences, and she was standing inside it now. And the man at the center of it looked at her like she was the one true still point in everything he'd ever built. The world shifted the night 3 men followed her from the office parking structure. She recognized them as trouble before they closed in, the particular choreography of it, the angles, and she was already moving, cutting across traffic into a lit convenience store, face forward, phone to her ear, calling the only number she trusted in that moment. Do Hyun answered on the first ring. 3 men, she said, behind me, Yongno-gu, near the Beck Tower South Lot. The silence on his end lasted 1 second. Stay inside wherever you are. Do not go outside. Send me your location. She did. She stood near the register and asked the clerk about ramyeon options with great focus for 9 minutes until a black car pulled up outside and Park Jun came through the door. Do Hyun was in the car. He said nothing when she got in, but he reached across and took her hand, not gently, with the controlled desperation of someone who had spent 9 minutes calculating the distance between where she was and where harm could reach her, and didn't release it for the entire drive. He brought her to his apartment, not the penthouse the press photographed during charity galas, but a different floor, quieter, with low lighting and the lived-in texture of a space actually occupied. She sat on his couch with a blanket he handed her without fuss and tea that appeared with the same quiet efficiency. They were Shim's people, he said, sitting across from her. A rival. He's been making calculations about pressure points. His jaw set. He chose poorly. I'm a pressure point, Louisa said. He looked at her steadily. You're important to me. That makes you a target in my world. He stopped. Started again with less composure than she'd ever seen him manage. I should have been more careful. I should have had protection on you from the... Do Hyun. She used his given name for the first time. It stopped him mid-sentence. I'm not angry. I'm fine. I handled it. You called me. I trusted you. The room held that for a moment. His hands were braced on his knees, and she could see what the past hour had cost him in the tension across his shoulders, the tightness of his expression. She moved before she thought about it, crossed the space between them and sat beside him on the edge of the coffee table, close, so she had to look up slightly to see his face. He went very still. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. That I want you here, he said. Quiet, controlled, but only barely. That I've wanted you here since the first moment I saw you, and I don't know what to do with that, because wanting something this much in my world has always meant losing it. A pause. And I can't lose you, Louisa. I won't recover from it. The admission landed in her chest and opened something. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He closed his eyes for 1 second, just one, and the expression that crossed his face was so undefended, so completely unguarded, that she felt her throat tighten. "You're not going to lose me," she said. He turned his face slightly into her hand. Then he opened his eyes, and what was in them when he looked at her wasn't the controlled, assessing gaze she'd learned to read across conference tables. It was something unfiltered, something that had been building for weeks and had simply run out of room. He kissed her. Not tentative. Nothing about Do-hyun was tentative, but careful, the way very certain things can still be careful. And she felt it travel through her like electricity through water, warm and total and utterly destabilizing. Her hand stayed against his jaw. His found the curve of her waist. The city glittered beyond the windows. The blanket slid to the floor. Later, the room darker, the city quieter. She lay with her head on his chest and his arm around her and listened to the steadying rhythm of his heartbeat. His fingers moved slowly through her curls, and she thought about pressure points and targets, and the particular terror of caring about something in a world that wanted to take things from you. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly to the dark. His arm tightened. He didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. 3 weeks later, she found the file. She'd been running an audit of a subsidiary. Routine, authorized, and came across a sub-account that shouldn't have had the clearance level it had. She pulled it, dug through it, found buried in 3 years of transaction records, payments made to a private intelligence firm that specialized in a specific, narrow, deeply illegal service. Manufacturing deaths, paper trails, false records, identities disposed of on paper while the bodies lived elsewhere under new names. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. Her chest was not. She cross-referenced dates, found 3 names, looked up 2 of them and found public records, car accidents, drownings, that matched the dates of the payments. The 3rd name was someone she recognized. Someone she hadn't thought about in over a year. A junior associate from a previous firm who'd left suddenly, whose departure had been explained vaguely and accepted without question. She didn't look for more. She closed the file, cleared her search history by reflex, and sat for a long time at her desk with her hands in her lap. She needed to know if Do-hyun knew. She needed to know if Do-hyun had ordered it. She couldn't ask him directly because a man who ran something like this didn't stay at the top by being careless with people who found things they weren't supposed to find. And she'd already survived that situation once, because he decided she was an asset. She didn't know what happened when assets became threats. She went home. She thought for 2 days. She made calls to people she trusted outside his world. She had a document prepared, encrypted, off-site, with instructions to surface it if she stopped responding for more than 72 hours. And then she thought about the man who kissed her like she was the only real thing he'd ever held. And she kept digging. What she found next rearranged everything. The payments hadn't come from Do-hyun's authorization chain. They'd been routed to appear that way, layered through his accounts, engineered to look like his orders. But the original source was a second signature, embedded deep, one she recognized only because she'd been looking for exactly this kind of structural fraud for years. Park Jun, his head of security, his most trusted man. She sat very still for a long time. Then she started building the case. She needed 3 more days to be certain. She got 2. On the second evening, Park Jun came to her apartment. Not violently. He was too experienced for that, too careful. He sat across from her in her own kitchen with a cup of tea he'd made himself, as though they were colleagues having a check-in, and he told her in a very level voice, that she had found something, and that she had two choices about what happened next. She could give him the evidence and walk away, new identity, generous financial arrangement, a life somewhere far from Seoul. Or she could continue to be a problem, and then the file she had prepared would never surface, and Baek Do-hyun would be told that the woman he cared about had chosen to leave him, and the story would end there. "He trusts you completely," Louisa said. "He does," Park Jun agreed. No apology in it. She understood then completely and with cold clarity that arguing was not an option, that she couldn't go to Do-hyun directly. Not yet, not until she had something irrefutable, something that couldn't be explained away by a man who'd spent years building himself into the infrastructure of Do-hyun's world. If she went to him now, with Park Jun standing between them, she'd disappear before she could speak. "I need time," she said. 24 hours, he said. "Then I need an answer." He left. She sat in her quiet apartment and thought clearly and without panic about what came next. She had one play, and it was a bad one. But it was the only one that ended with both her and Do-hyun alive and with the truth in his hands. She called a contact at the Financial Intelligence Unit, someone she'd worked with years ago, someone who didn't know about Do-hyun, who only knew about fraud and money and paper trails. She spent 3 hours giving them everything. Not to burn Do-hyun, but to put the evidence somewhere Park Jun couldn't reach or erase. Then she called her firm's senior partner, who still owed her a professional favor, and arranged for a very specific kind of documentation. And then, because she needed him to stop looking, needed him to believe it long enough for the case to reach someone with the authority to move on it, she did the hardest thing she'd ever done. She staged her own death, not elaborately. A car accident on a mountain road, carefully arranged with the help of a man her uncle trusted, who trusted him. The car, the records, the identification. A gravestone placed quickly, quietly, in the section of a private cemetery Do-hyun would be told her family had chosen. She left Seoul within 48 hours. She expected to be gone 2 months. She was gone 4. The case built slowly. Park Jun was meticulous and the layers ran deep, but it held. When it finally moved, it moved decisively. Arrest at 2 in the morning, the charges clean and ironclad, the evidence submitted through channels that couldn't be contaminated. Do-hyun's name appeared nowhere in the final report. She had made certain of it. Which brings her back to the graveyard. Rain soaking through her coat, her hands on the iron gate. Her husband they'd married quietly 3 months into falling, a paper ceremony he'd suggested with unexpected softness and she'd agreed to with her whole heart. On his knees in the mud, pressing his hands flat against a stone that bears her name over an empty box. She watches him grieve her. She watches his shoulders shake. She watches Baek Do-hyun, feared and untouchable, completely destroyed by the absence of a woman he clearly never stopped loving for a single day of the months she was gone. Her hand releases the gate. She doesn't have a plan for this part. She'd thought about it, rehearsed sentences, imagined angles of approach. But standing here in the actual weight of this moment, every rehearsed word dissolves. She pushes the gate open. The hinge protests softly. He goes still. The rain keeps falling. She walks across the wet grass, slowly. Her heels sink at each step. She stops 3 feet behind him and says the only word that matters. Do-hyun. He doesn't move for 3 full seconds. Then he turns. She has imagined his face in this moment many times. Anger was always the first possibility. He had every right to it. Or shock, cold and withdrawing, the walls flying back up, or grief compounding into something harder. What she gets is none of these things. What she gets is a man who looks at her like she is impossible and inevitable, and every answered prayer he stopped believing in all at once. He rises from his knees. He crosses the distance between them in 4 steps. He stops one breath away. "You're alive," he says. "I'm alive." Her voice breaks on the second word. "I'm so sorry. Do-hyun, I had to. Park June, he was going to." "I know," he says. "I know everything. They told me when they arrested him." Something moves across his face that she can't categorize. "I've known for 6 weeks." She stares. "Then why haven't you—" "Because I didn't know where you were." Raw. "Because I've had men looking for you for 6 weeks and they couldn't find you, and I—" He stops. His jaw tightens. "I've been coming here every night because it was the only place I felt—" He doesn't finish the sentence. Louisa steps forward and puts her arms around him. He doesn't hesitate. His arms come around her and hold on. Genuinely, fiercely, the embrace of someone who has spent months learning the precise weight of her absence. And she feels him exhale against her hair, one long, unsteady breath, the tension of months releasing all at once. She holds him in the rain beside her own empty grave. "I'm here," she says. "I'm not leaving again." "No," he agrees, "you're not." 6 weeks later, standing in the restored garden of the estate he'd bought years ago and never found a reason to actually live in, Louisa signs the documents that settle the final legal question of her identity, alive, legitimate, herself. Do-hyun stands beside her at the table, his hand resting at the small of her back, and when the notary asks if she's ready, she looks up at him first. He's already watching her. He always is. "Ready," she says. Later, when the legal team has gone and the evening has settled around them, he pulls her onto the garden terrace and stands with her in the last light, one hand cupped along her jaw, looking at her with the particular attention of a man who has decided that looking carefully is something he intends to practice for the rest of his life. "I want to do it again," he says. "Properly this time." She raises an eyebrow. "The marriage?" "With people present, with it meaning everything in public, the way it already means everything in private." He brushes a thumb along her cheekbone. "I want everyone to know." She considers making him wait. She's earned a little leverage. "Ask me properly," she says. He drops to one knee right there on the terrace without ceremony or a ring, in his shirt sleeves with the garden lights coming on behind him, and asks her with so little performance and so much meaning that she has to press her hand over her mouth to stop the sound she makes. "Yes," she tells him. "Obviously, yes." He rises and kisses her, unhurried, thorough, certain, and Seoul glitters in the distance beyond the garden walls, and the rain that brought them here has finally stopped. And the grave with her name on it will be quietly removed next week, because Louisa Adeyemi Bayek is not dead. She is here. She chose to come back. And Bayek Do-hyun, who built his life on being unmovable, has rearranged everything he is around the fact of her, not because she asked him to, but because she showed him what it felt like to have something worth becoming better for, and he decided quietly and permanently never to let that go. 6 months later, she finds out she's pregnant on a Tuesday morning. She tells him that same evening, watching his face, watching the controlled, composed, formidable face of the most feared man in Seoul, go completely undone with something that looks a great deal like joy. He doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then he pulls her close and presses his forehead to hers and says very quietly, Exactly what he said the night they married in that small, unwitnessed ceremony when she'd asked him what he was feeling. You are the only peace I have ever known. She closes her eyes. Outside, Seoul breathes and hums and continues being exactly what it has always been. Inside, everything has changed. End.